Hello, everyone. Today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about argumentation. In an argument in academia, we don't mean a fight. We mean a set of statements that are taken together to try to convince someone of something. Uh, and there are two parts to it that I'm going to talk to you about today. The first part is the premise. Second part is the conclusion. In an argument, usually there are at least two premises and one conclusion. So an example of an argument would be something like this. Premise 1, if it's raining, then it's cloudy. Premise 2, it's raining. Conclusion, therefore it's cloudy. A premise, I would like, you can think of them as stepping stones, okay? And the stepping stones are supposed to take you to some sort of goal. So if you went to my old house, you could pull up in the driveway, and on the left-hand side would be a set of stepping stones that would take you to a garden, right? And so if you step on these stepping stones, eventually it will lead you to this garden. In an argument, it's similar to that, right? The premise is if you take one, if you think that one of them is true and you think the other one is true, then you should believe the conclusion as well. There's two types of arguments, inductive and deductive. The deductive types, if the premises are true, then that conclusion must be true. There's no way it can be false. If you're doing an inductive argument, it's going to be different though. So if you buy into those premises, or if those premises are true, it doesn't guarantee the truth of the conclusion. But rather, what it does is it increases the likelihood that conclusion is true, or it increases what we would call the rational expectancy. That is, how rational is it for you to expect that conclusion to be true? In an inductive argument, the premises increase the rational expectancy, supposedly, if it's good. So if you think about, so the way I want your arguments to, the way you should, when you're reading a philosophical paper or something or an argument, you should try to find out what are these stepping stones that they're trying to get me to buy into, right? Should I buy into them? And if I buy into these stepping stones, do I actually walk to the garden, or do these stepping stones take me somewhere else? Right? So imagine this case. You remember that game you played when you were kids? It was like the floor is lava or something like that. And you jump from couch to couch. If you fall off, you die, right? So let me give you another kind of analogy about premises. So imagine premises are like these are like stepping stones again, okay? And if you step on a stepping stone and you step on the next stepping stone, then you'll get to the garden, okay? Um, Now the thing is though that if the stepping stones don't lead to the garden, then you're never going to get there. And if you think the stepping stones lead to the garden, they don't. Well, then you're just wrong, right? So that's the same way arguments work. The premises have to work with each other in such a way that you see, okay, step one, okay, well, this is true. And oh, if the other one is true, then I can see why the conclusion would be true. So that's the way that works. But the thing is, friends, imagine that you're playing that game, and imagine that the floor is lava kind of game, right? Now imagine there's a pillar, there's a stepping stone, right? And it's raised 100 feet in the air, right? And you're at the surface level of it, so you can step right on it. It's a 100-foot drop if you fell. What's the first thing you'd want to know about that stepping stone if you were going to step on it? I'll tell you what I want you to say. What I want you to say is that the first thing that you want to know before you step on a stepping stone is that stepping stone, will that support my weight, right? Is that a good stepping stone? Because if I step on something and there's a 100-foot drop and at the bottom of it is hot lava, I sure as heck want to make sure that it's supported, right? That supports there. So what I want to know then is that support sufficient? Okay. So in an argument, you can think about the premises as the stepping stones. Okay. You step on one. If you step on one and that one leads to the other one, and those two actually work together, then they will bring you to the conclusion. So if stepping stones, if you step on one stepping stone, it leads to, and that stepping stone leads to another, and these are going the right direction, that will lead you to the garden, right? Now, going back to our the floor is lava game, if I step on that, I want to know that that thing is supported, right? And this is where a lot of the action or argumentation happens. So if you take the premise, number one, if I have my driver's license, then I've passed the written test. Then you have premise two, I have my driver's license. And the conclusion would be, therefore, I passed the written test. Okay. So that first premise, if I have my driver's license, then I pass the written test. Imagine that is that stepping stone. Okay. Now the thing is, now when you're trying to convince someone of something, if you're trying to convince someone that they should believe your conclusion, that they should believe your premise, what you need to do is give them excellent reasons to believe that premise. Because you want them to take step one, believe premise one, step two, believe premise two, and then if they believe those two things, then they should rationally accept your conclusion. Premises are hardly ever good enough just to convince someone of the conclusion. So what you need to do is provide a defense of those premises. And the defense of those premises is, in our analogy, the support for that stepping stone, right? So if I'm going to step on that first stepping stone and 100-foot drop underneath of that stone, I want to make sure that that stepping stone can support my weight. I want to make sure it's rational for me to step on that stepping stone. I want to make sure that that stepping stone is supported. In an argument, you need to have your premise stated, and then underneath of that premise, you need to have a paragraph explaining to me or explaining to someone why that premise is true. That's a really good way to do it. You need to convince them that they should believe that premise. If they believe that premise and they believe your next premise, then they should believe your conclusion. So in an analogy, then, there's a castle at the end. There's stepping stones that you take to get there. There's 100 feet in the air, and there's a pillar there. You're only going to step on that stepping stone if you think that pillar can hold your weight. You're only going to step on that next one if you think two things. One, that second one can hold your weight, and that second one will bring you to your goal, right? Will bring you to the castle. The same thing is true to arguments. No one's going to believe your premise unless you give them good reasons to believe it. At the same time, you need to make sure that the defense, that your justification, your arguments for the truth of your premise actually supports and justifies that statement. The premise that you made. It has to be. If the statement is this, if I have my driver's license, then I've passed my written test, you need to have a paragraph there or so explaining clearly why that is true, what the connection between those parts of that claim is, the if and the then. And then, and only then, should someone rationally believe your premise, unless it's self-evident, which is a different story. Another thing that you need to know is when you're reading the arguments, if you're reading the philosophical positions, try to discover what their premises are. Try to figure out what the stepping stones they're laying out for you that they want you to step on. And you need to figure out, how do those stepping stones actually lead to the garden? Do these premises lead to the conclusion? Do these pillars actually support these stepping stones? And if if I step on these stepping stones, will it lead me to the castle, right? So you need to look at a couple things. You need to look at the premises, the stepping stones, see if they make sense, right? You look at the premises, the stepping stones, see if they are leading in the right direction, right? See if they're both working together to convince you that the conclusion is true. Another thing you need to look at is the support for those premises. Make sure that there's good reasons to believe them. Because if there aren't good reasons to believe those premises, then there's no good reason to believe the conclusion as far as the argument is stated. So when you're doing the reading, and if I ask you to do a more analysis or something, what I'm asking you to do is that, what are the reasons they're giving for their conclusion? How did they get there? What are those steps? In a stepwise fashion, like, how is it that they are trying to convince me what they're saying is true? And should I believe it? And why should I believe it? And why should I not believe it? And that's a nice and that's a good way to start. your philosophical journey. It's a good way to start, not just doing philosophy, but a way to start actually figuring out how to analyze people's arguments and whether or not you should or shouldn't believe them. Now, there's one other analogy I want to give you about arguments. Okay, and it has to do with the jigsaw puzzle. I've done this in other videos too, but I'm going to do it here as well. I like you to think of especially deductive arguments as the jigsaw puzzle. Jigsaw puzzles come, in a box all messed up. There's all these little pieces, and on the cover of the box, there's a picture that if pieces together in the right order, then you'll see. So imagine the it's a puzzle of a fluffy cat, right? And so say you're putting all the pieces together, and then you're trying to get one in there, and it won't fit, right? So you got to pound it in, right? Now what you have then all of a sudden is say you get all the rest of the pieces, right? You have like a cat eye where like its paw should be and the paw where the eye should be, so it doesn't like even really look like a cat anymore. It doesn't make sense. Um, and there's also gaps, right? There's little holes too between the pieces of the puzzle pieces. So I want you to think of premises, right? Kind of like the puzzle pieces. So the premises need to work together in a way where there aren't like giant gaps between them. You're not like wondering like, well, how does that premise work with that premise? Like there needs to be something else there. Try to make like a jigsaw puzzle where all the little pieces of your arguments fit together in such a way where your conclusion just kind of emerges. It just kind of is obvious, right? So like if you put all the puzzle pieces together in the right way, like a jigsaw puzzle together in the right way, that fluffy cat will just emerge out of it. You strive to make your arguments like that. Strive to see if the authors that you're reading, if their arguments are doing that, right? Does the conclusion just kind of emerge? Does there are reasons for their conclusion? Do they fit together kind of like a jigsaw puzzle does in such a way that if you believe those premises, then that conclusion just kind of appears? And if so, that's a good argument. If not, then there's problems. And then you can point out what those are. You can say, well, it doesn't seem like this premise really working with this one. It seems like there's a gap between this one and this one. It doesn't really seem like there's sufficient evidence for this, right? So these are some argumentative strategies that I think are helpful and useful, and that I employ in my work, and I suggest that you employ in your reading and in your writing. And of course, like always, I'm always happy to help, and you do have my number, so reach out to me if you have questions. And best of luck.